is defined not by the medium in which that material arrives, whether or not it's auditory or visual or combined. It turns out that the best way to study and learn is to access components of your memory systems that offset forgetting.
I've heard such conversations bunch of times. Hey, what is the best way to learn English? Highlighting, watching dramas, listening to music, reading textbooks, blah blah blah. No. In the end, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is how often you output what you've learned and how quickly you output them.
Put differently, it's not about how many times you study the material or how many times you're exposed to the material. It's about being exposed to the material, doing your best to focus and attend to that material, and then self-testing yourself on that material, not just once, but ideally 2 or 3 times. That's what really locks the material into your neural circuits. That's what's going to lead.
Maybe you already know, but let me explain about him quickly. His name is Andrew Huberman. He is an associate professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at the Stanford University. So, what he wants to express here is the importance of reviewing. He explains how it is important by showing a study. So, I'll give you a quick rundown. There are 3 groups of students and they are using the same textbook. The textbook itself is a small one, so you can finish reading in an hour or like that. And after 4 hours, every student has to take an examination. But of course, that examination is based on the textbooks they use. Every hour, students have the choice of taking test or studying. Like taking test means like they have to take a small quiz and they can review what they've learned and they can output what they've learned. And studying means they can read or they can highlight that textbook. It means like just repeat the input. And please don't get it wrong, the format of the test they took in this 4 hour is different from the test they took after 4 hours. But there is one rule, every student has to start from studying, but this is apparent. Because how are you able to take an examination if you have no information, right? So the first hour, every student has to do studying. So I'm gonna explain what each group did in every hour. The first group did study and study. The second group did study, test. And the third group did study, test. And after 4 hours, every group takes the same test at the same time. So now 4 hours has passed. Every student or groups has to take an examination. So what do you think? Before checking the result, which group was able to get the highest score?
Based on everything I've told you thus far, you can probably guess who performed best on the test. That performance on that final test was essentially proportional to the number of tests one had already taken on the material. After one exposure to new material, taking more tests on that material, even if you don't perform that well on those tests, as long as you're able to see the accurate answers to those tests and compare your answers to those answers, will lead to better performance on the ultimate test and retention of that material at some later time. The more times you test yourself or that you are tested on material, the better your retention of that material.
So from the result, we find that if you expose your knowledge, what you've learned more, you can get better scores. And what is clear here is not about how much exposure you have to textbooks or how many hours you spend on staring at workbooks or textbooks. But don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to deny reading books itself, because everyone has to go to textbooks at first to get a correct information, right? As I said, if we don't have enough information, we are not able to output. So the first step should be getting information from textbooks. But once you got enough information, the most important thing is to output what you've learned. The number of output is really, really important to improve your, knowledge or English skills or music skills or something. In other words, if you output more, your synapses will be activated more.
But you know what's even more surprising and a little scary and that we all should know? And if you ask students, how confident are you in the material that you just learned? The students who studied the material, that is, who were exposed to the material 4 times, think that they are going to perform best on the ultimate exam. However, the students that study the material once and then are tested 3 times on that material, they think that ultimately they're going to perform least well. And guess what? The exact opposite is true. Put differently, when you're exposed to material over and over and over again, you think you've learned the material, but actually you haven't learned it at all. But guess what? Testing yourself once, twice, maybe 3 times prior to the ultimate test of your knowledge of that material is far and away the best way to lock that material into those neural circuits.
And this part is also interesting. Actual academic skills have nothing to do with your self-confidence. Saying that reading textbooks all day, all night has nothing to do with it in the end. To be honest, this is the most important thing to keep it short and simple. So let's translate what we learned into studying English. So instead of looking for studying methods on YouTube or staring at textbooks for a long time, what you have to do is working on workbooks and solve problems as much as possible. There is a limit of the input of the information. Once you hit the limit of the input, what you have to do is output, right? You have to utilize what you've learned. So if you want to speak English, you have to actually speak it. Watching dramas, listening to music, it is good, but it is the input. Like watching a drama 2 hours, it's enough. But once you watch the dramas and once you learn some phrases or grammars or words from the drama, you have to go outside or you have to go to online English lesson and use what you've learned. But don't worry, as Dr. Huberman said, you don't have to do it perfectly. If you repeat the same situation for many times, your accuracy will be fine.
And then take tests on the material, oftentimes straining to get the answers right on those tests. In fact, sometimes getting those answers dead wrong, and then realizing they get those answers dead wrong, or sometimes they just sense it. But guess what? Testing yourself once, twice, maybe 3 times prior to the ultimate test of your knowledge of that material is far and away the best way.
And also, anyone cannot do perfectly at first time, right? So don't worry. So now you may already have next question. How quickly do we have to output what we've learned? So let me tell you a conclusion. You have to output as soon as possible after you've learned. He argues this opinion by mentioning another study, so if you want to know more details, you can check his video. But by the way, let's check what he said.
Put differently, test yourself very soon, if not the same day, certainly the next day or so, very soon after being exposed to material for the first time. As opposed to the last group, which performs worst. They perform worst. Being exposed to material, then there's a long period of time, then you're tested on that material, you are told what you got right, what you got wrong, and then the next day you take a test again, even with overlapping questions to the test you took just the day before, and that group performs worst. And the group that studied, had a gap test, they perform somewhere in the middle. What does this tell us? What it tells us is so important vis-a-vis neuroplasticity, vis-a-vis best learning strategies. This is something that, goodness, I wish I had learned when I was in graduate school.
And also, he gives us some tips how to spend short free time, for example, commuting time.
Yes, we all forget things. We all make errors. But if I had just known that testing myself on material while walking out of class or soon after getting home or later that evening or the next day would allow me to perform so much better on an exam, a midterm or a final exam. And of course, I still would have studied because I was committed, and you should still study as much as you feel is necessary. I definitely would have saved myself a lot of time.
So I also would like to tell you to stop looking at Instagram or TikTok and useless contents, but spend your time to output what you've learned. Even you don't speak, you don't write. Just put what you've learned in your mind has a great value. He also shows some characteristics of the person who left a great academic result. First, the student must be able to block out distractions such as cell phones, family, and friends and focus on learning. But don't get it wrong, Dr. Huberman doesn't deny group studying. Group studying, sometimes it is effective, okay? Second, they have good study habit, like routines. Third, he is aware of the impact of studies of his life, and he has a clear goal and purpose for his studies. And lastly, fourth, they don't hesitate to try or study what they feel difficult, and actually it grows you the most. So there are many things you are able to learn from today's video, but before finishing, let me summarize quickly. So first, there is not much to say how to learn. No matter what study method you use, it is important to output quickly what you learned. If you want to memorize vocabularies, so maybe it is good for you to do self-test for each spread page. And if you want to speak English, after all, you have to speak English. As I said, there is a limitation of the information you can get from the outside. Like 2 hours watching dramas is enough. Once you finish watching dramas and you learn a lot of vocabularies or phrases or grammars. And the next step is you have to use what you've learned, okay? But be careful. Outputting incorrect information will lead to incorrect information be fixed in your mind. So I want to express you can start from inputting correct information, right? You cannot output even you don't have anything to output. So to input, as I said, you can choose workbook appropriate for your level, or you can choose some contents, or you can choose, some books or like that. And Dr. Huberman said, it doesn't matter how you study, so you can choose what you want. By the way, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. はい、そして最後に僕からなんと大事なお知らせがあって、僕の4大プレゼントにもう一つプレゼントが加わりました。それは TOEIC 頻出単語リスト4600語です。これは僕が TOEIC955 点を獲得できた経験から、TOEIC を受ける際にはこれだけは覚えておいて損はないという単語をまとめたリスト。これをプレゼントに付け加えます。現在の総単語数は4600語ですが、これはまだ未完成で、最終的には1万語以上を収録したいと思っています。ただ、このデモ版の時点でも受け取りたいという多くの方がいらっしゃったので、今回無料プレゼントに付け加えをさせていただきました。そしてまだ4つ無料で受け取れるプレゼントがあります。1つ目は TOEIC リスニング満点の僕がゼロから作った TOEIC リスニング完全攻略ガイドブックです。そもそも TOEIC とは何なのか、TOEIC の全てのパートの問題の形式と解説、そして TOEIC リスニング問題の全ての解き方のコツを図表やグラフを使い視覚的にパッと分かりやすいような内容で解説しています。自分が独学で TOEIC に向けて勉強していた際にこういう内容が欲しかったというような内容を詰め込んだガイドブックになっています。作り込みは本当に頑張りました。2つ目、英語学習無料カウンセリングチケット。これは僕があなたの英語学習に関するお悩みを直接お聞きし、あなた専用の学習プランを作成させていただきます。あなたの現在の英語力から目標を達成するためにはどんな勉強法、そしてどんな教材が必要なのか、そういったものを一緒に考えさせていただいて、あなたが取り組むべきことを一つ一つ示させていただきます。これに参加していただくことで、あなたのやるべきことが明確になると思います。3つ目は英作文添削チケット。自分が英検に向かって一人で勉強していた時、英作文をきれいに書くということにはすごく苦労しました。そういった方を一人でもなくせたらと思い、あなたの書いた英作文を僕に送っていただくとナチュラルな英作文になるように僕が直接添削します。そして最後に TOEIC フィードバックチケット。あなたの過去の TOEIC の結果や模試の結果を踏まえて、あなたが目標の TOEIC スコアを達成するためにはどの問題集を使ってどんな勉強をするのかということを僕が1対1でお話をさせていただきます。これらのプレゼントを僕の公式 LINE からお配りしています。興味のある方は概要欄から追加してください。はい、ということでここまでご覧をいただきありがとうございました。少しでもいいなと思っていただけたら、チャンネル登録、高評価、コメント何でもいいのでよろしくお願いします。質問も受け付けてます。そして僕のインスタグラムではここでしか見れない英語学習に関するコンテンツを毎日発信しているので、よかったらこっちもこの ID からフォローしてください。それでは次の動画でお会いしましょう。Do what you only can do. You can do it. See you.